Have you been startled by the vehemence of the reaction? I mean, I quoted at the top of this a
well,
couple of comments that appeared on a Guardian website.
Well, I mean, look, I love the Guardian Observer dearly, but its website is just an open sewer. You know, every nutcase on the planet goes on there, and you got some anti-Semitic comments there. Well, you know, you wouldn't normally get those from people who regard them as left-wing 30 years ago. You think, oh, that makes me some kind of Nazi. Now that's commonplace. Have I been startled with vehemence? No. I mean, on the whole, I've had. You know, this book is selling like hotcakes. I've had very good reviews. Particularly when I go around England to public meetings and book festivals. You know, there are a lot of liberal-minded people out there who say read liberal papers or watch liberal broadcasters, and they don't like what's happening. They can sense that perhaps the leaders of liberal opinion in London are getting something badly wrong. And the comments I normally get is, I don't agree with everything you say, Nick, but thank God you've written this.
So you think you've hit a nerve? There's a tinge of guilt, perhaps?
Well, it's not so much guilt. We're living in a very, very funny time. I mean, and old ideological certainties have gone. Partly, as I argue in the book, because of the death of socialism, which did define what it meant to be left-wing, democratic or totalitarian, from the 1870s, 1880s, through to, I would say, the early 1980s. It's gone before the Berlin Wall goes. Even the communists don't believe in it anymore. And in a funny way, that's freed people up to, some people on the left, to go along with movements that would have been taboo. They said that's fascist, that's sectarian, we're against that. And in an equally paradoxical way, it's made it very easy to pose as left-wing, because you no longer have to believe them very much. Because you
have to be against Bush.
Yeah, which is easy enough, and for good reason. But because you don't have any commitment. See, in the past, if I was a socialist, I might be talking to you, and you might say, "Oh, I quite agree with something what Nick's saying." But then I say, but actually, because I'm a socialist, I want to have penal rates of income tax and nationalise the top 100 companies. And you might say, don't think that's going to work, back off. Now I don't have to say anything to you.
You just have to be against something you don't have to be for.
And exactly. And more importantly, you don't have to be for, say, those poor people in Iraq who are struggling to build something better after 35 years of tyranny. There's no obligation on you. So I go into the homes of some of the richest people. I know fantastically rich people. And I see Noam Chomsky and Michael Moore and John Pilger on the bookcase, and I think, of course you can have that now because they're no threat to you.
They're not going to take your money away in income tax.
Yeah, exactly, because it's very easy.
But there's a special sort of circle of Hades that the left reserves for people who say things like this to it, and that's where you are now, isn't it?
Well, I mean, look, there's more than the BBC, I think, acknowledges. There is a massive row going on the left. And so it's not just me on my own, or me and Christopher Hitchens. It's me, Christopher Hitchens, a lot of trade unionists, a lot of Labour ministers and MPs, most of whom opposed the Iraq War, a lot of writers. And there's been a hell of an argument going on, and which this book is a result of. But because the mainstream hasn't taken much notice of it, you know, a lot of people one reason why this book is so thorough is when you've been through that kind of sort of modern equivalent of a pamphlet war, you're pretty damn tough by the end of it. Your arguments are pretty much in place, and that's where this book has emerged from. So, you know, there are two lefts in Britain now. There's essentially an anti-fascist left, of which I'm a part, and essentially an anti-imperialist one who says, well, look, whatever America does now, we're against, and tackling America is our priority. And there's a gulf, there's an inseparable gulf between us.
So can the left ever sort of recoalesce? Is there a possibility that when Iraq starts drifting down the policy agenda, when Tony Blair's departed the scene, you can all just pick yourself up, dust yourself down, start all over again?
That's a good question. Two things. One, you know, what's left? You know, it is very difficult. Something new might come from green politics, has to come out from whereas now, you know, not even left-wing candidates for Labour leadership proposing nationalisation of anything, really. You know, they're just saying stop PFI contracts, which is a good thing to do, but, you know, so what? So there has to be some different agenda. So there is a crisis in what it means to be left-wing. Now, here's a nasty thought for you. It might do if things get worse. You know, if Islamist attacks, you know, if the Islamist wave keeps building around the earth, I think it's going to be harder and harder to people just say, oh, it's all our fault, kill us, we deserve it, we're the root cause of this. Martin Kettle of The Guardian wrote a very fine piece about this book, and he said something very well, I thought. He said, it's very hard to say what it means to be left-wing in the early 20th century, partly because we won so much in the 20th. But it's very easy to know what the far right is, and the far right is everywhere, come out of the 20th century, strengthened. You talk about radical Islam or European neo-Nazi movements or nationalism or Christian fundamentalism in the States. And surely the first task of liberal-minded and left-wing people is to oppose it, to argue against it, to expose it, to offer support to those people, wherever they are in the world, who have to live with the consequences of it. So, I mean, I hope, it's very hard for me to say what a left-wing programme for the next 20 years would be, but it's very easy for me to say that what the first task of the left is going to have to be, particularly if the world turns nastier still.
Well, you talked about radical Islam, and that's, if you like, the new factor in all this, isn't it? That there's a part of the left that you accuse of being completely unable to criticise the excesses of Islamic radicals because that sounds colonialist, and we can't be colonialist and we can't oppress people who are already oppressed.
Well, in a funny way, Mark, it's something more than that. I talk about the death of socialists, and that's talking about defeat and depression. But a funny thing has come out of the actual liberal triumphs from the 60s onwards, which have, liberated women, fought racism, emancipated gays. I mean, 30 years ago, the idea of homosexual equality was so far out on the fringe that it was barely talked about. Now, you can't be leader of the Tory party unless you accept it. But a peculiar consequence of that is this sort of postmodern identity politics, where people feel somehow that it's racist to oppose sexists, or it's imperialist to oppose fascists. People haven't got the language, and they've been so stupefied by relativism that they can't extend universal principles to people with brown skins. And that ends up as a kind of racism. It really does. It kind of say, well, look, the emancipation of women is fine for white-skinned women in London, but not for brown-skinned women in Kabul, because it's their culture to be oppressed. Well, this is a very reactionary argument that comes from the counter-enlightenment. And that is another hugely crippling factor, I think, at the moment, in what are difficult times, obviously.
Nick, thanks very much indeed for that. A fascinating book.